Hey folks, thanks for joining here on this Thursday morning weather update. I wanted to start the video today with a discussion on the tropics. They're heating up a bit here in late May, and that could continue perhaps in the Atlantic in June as well. So we'll take a look at some different influences there. I want to talk about some of the hail that we saw yesterday near the Austin area, some neat radar that we saw from that. Unfortunately, a damaging event, however. And then I'll segue that into a conversation where I think we're going to continue to have some of these temperature and then precipitation pattern swings as we enter the month of June. Of course, that's going to focus our conversation on which areas are likely to receive rain and not. We'll talk about drought. At the end of the video, I'll kind of segue into that and seeing what signals we're seeing further out in June. Eric and I had kind of a long sit-down powwow, whatever you want to say, about where this forecast is going in late June. At some point, I think we should record one of those conversations so you can just see us talk through it candidly. And, there's different things that he sees versus what I see. And we'll just kind of sum it up at the end of this video here today. And those will be in the last kind of maybe 5 to 10 minutes. We'll see how this all shakes out. Starting here in the Eastern Pacific, I talked with you all last Tuesday about the potential for a tropical system, the first one in the Eastern Pacific, which would be named Alvin. It did not develop in the immediate 48 hours following the video because that would be right about now, about 6 a.m. Central Time at the recording of this video. But it has organized quite a bit. It looks a lot better today than it did last Tuesday morning. And what we can see here in the Eastern Pacific is much deep, rich, tropical, thunderstorm-like development here in the Eastern Pacific. You can see a lot of these cloud tops getting up very high. We can tell that by how cold those cloud tops are in the upper levels of the atmosphere. And while it's organized some, it's still a little bit elongated. If you can see kind of, if I could draw the area of thunderstorms here, this area of spin, you can kind of make out here. It's a bit oblong, if you will, like an oval, and that can sometimes delay, immediate imminent development. But with how rich these thunderstorms are, and in fact, on kind of the southern side, you can see those really starting to organize. I expect this to be named Alvin, maybe at some point today, maybe not in the next few hours, given this kind of longer shape. But I expect by the end of the day today, we have Alvin. And while it's an immediate threat for Mexico as a tropical storm, at least in terms of a landfall, we'll take a look at that in a second. These always have moisture involved with them, as you can imagine. Tropical storm or hurricane, when they're forming, a large amount of moisture involved in these systems, and that's relevant for our forecast going into next week. So we'll talk about that as well as we get into that part of the forecast. Expecting the National Hurricane Center here is their official cone forecast for the storm to develop at some point today and then move north slowly toward Cabo, the peninsula there, and then across the Eastern Pacific over, making landfall potentially as a tropical depression. So the good news is we don't see a forecast accelerating this into a hurricane, let alone a major hurricane. But if you kind of extrapolate this track going forward, here's Sunday. And if you take it further into Monday, Tuesday, this tropical plume of moisture, if you will, is going to be something we'll have to talk about for the continental U.S., particularly the southwest and portions of the southern plains. And what I mean by that, if we jump over and look at the ECMWF precipitable water here this morning, I'm going to play this out. Now, potential tropical storm Alvin, currently a tropical depression from the National Hurricane Center, so it's not named yet. It's kind of below the screen. It's too far south on this particular plot. But if I take this into Thursday, now Friday from the ECMWF, do you see those precipitable water values? You can think of it as kind of like an absolute measure of water held in the atmosphere all the way through the troposphere. And you can see that increasing now as this tropical storm, potential depression at this point, weakening, makes landfall. Look at all this moisture in the upper atmosphere surrounding that system. And by Monday, it's hard to see it, but it's actually getting across some of the higher elevations here and then being fed into our next storm system early next week, Monday and Tuesday. You can see these higher values here, which I would imagine some budget of those, a significant portion of this moisture that's getting up into here, likely from the Eastern Pacific and not necessarily the Gulf of Mexico. Some of it's sure getting over from the Gulf of Mexico. But these storms matter. It's always neat to see how quickly they develop and whether they get moisture. And if you remember, I think all the way back, maybe at the end of last week, we talked about the potential for some of that moisture to get up into the storm system late next week. But it was it was way out. It was in the fantasy range of the forecast. And to kind of see it come to fruition, these hurricanes affecting our forecast, it's always neat to see. I love that sort of stuff. We can see this on the precipitation values as well. We were just looking at the precipitable water values before, kind of as potential what could precipitate out of the atmosphere, but let's just look at what's actually coming to the ground here, at least from this ECMWF forecast. So while I've been talking, I've been taking this forecast out to Saturday. This is May 31st. So that precipitation increasing across Mexico and South Texas. Now into Sunday, this precipitation getting up into southern Arizona, portions of New Mexico. So you look at that Monday morning, overspreading Arizona, the Four Corners. This is Alvin moisture. It almost looks like an extension of the southwest monsoon. But Alvin getting into this next storm system, and we'll talk about this later, certainly in the forecast, potentially even some severe weather here, perhaps reinforced by some of that moisture from Alvin. So a lot going on there. If we look over toward the Atlantic, it is quiet now, but we're expecting development, potentially some sort of a system to watch. We'll have to see exactly in the middle of June. And I say that quickly. I'm showing this forecast here. This is from the ECMWF. Now, we show this often when we're talking about the MJO or Kelvin waves or where we're looking for ascent in the West Pacific, but it matters also for those hurricane forecasts. Where we have ascent in the tropics tends to reinforce hurricane development. You think of hurricanes as a huge area of ascent in the atmosphere, bringing that warm, rich moisture up into the upper levels of the atmosphere. And where we can see ascent on this forecast is in these green colors here. And this is from the ECMWF ensemble. Now, I'm taking out, it's a 5-day rolling window of that ascent over the tropics. And I'm going to take it through now June 1st through June 6th, now June 4th through the 10th, and now finally all the way out June, let's take it June 8th through the 13th. We can see at the beginning of this forecast, it was here, and then it's made the full voyage over to the Western Hemisphere, now over portions of the Western Atlantic and the Eastern Pacific. And when we see this, we often see potential, not guaranteed, but potential tropical storm develop thereafter. If we look at this kind of a different way, that same precipitable water value I started with over in the Eastern Pacific to kind of showcase where Alvin was coming in terms of that moisture. I'm looking at the ECMWF ensemble for precipitable water here. And I'm going to take this forecast way out because remember, it was June 8th through the 13th when we saw that activity pick up. And if I go out to June 10th and 11th, see these precipitable water values rising here in the Gulf of Mexico and the Western Pacific. Now, that's not to say, we're going to have one of these hurricanes here like Beryl coming up in June or July up into the Gulf of Mexico, but it's something to keep an eye on as we go into the forecast. Even kind of a weak tropical wave coming in here can bring moisture to the southeast. So a few things to keep an eye on in the tropics, and as we know, they can affect the jet stream and some other patterns of these storms. If we jump over to the present time here, again about 6 a.m. at the recording of this video, just look at the radar precipitation map across the whole country here. You can see some lingering showers moving through portions of the southeast, then the remnants of some overnight storms here moving through Oklahoma, Kansas, western Missouri. We're still in this kind of frustrating, I've called it kind of a backwards S pattern at times, where we've had the jet stream flowing around like this, and that has brought continued severe weather, precipitation, and storms through the southern plains. Those have moved into the southeast at times. We're seeing that again here today with expected renewed severe thunderstorm development both today and then tomorrow across portions of the Carolinas and Georgia. We'll take a look at those specifics in a second. We saw some of the effects of this just yesterday, however, in Austin. A number of hail reports in Texas over the last kind of 3, 4, 5 days. Some very large. We had 5, 6, saw one report, maybe over 6 inches. You're talking like DVD-sized hail. This is actually, the National Weather Service calls it gargantuan hail when they get that large. You can only imagine the sorts of damage potential stones like that have when they're falling. But I do want to jump back really quick to yesterday evening to showcase what happened in Austin. Now we're looking, it's kind of hard to tell where we're at right now. We're looking, this is the Texas coastline here, and then this is the border between Mexico and Texas. And we're going to watch the supercell here, developed in central Texas, make a beeline for Austin. And if you look at it closely, notice how when it kind of starts out, it's moving somewhat slowly west to the southeast perhaps, and then it really cranks toward the southeast. And we call that deviant motion, or a right-turning supercell. And just as it approached Austin, there's the screen grab there, north of Austin. It's probably hard to tell on the video. I don't know if it'll get picked up after it processes, but there's actually this kind of blue-gray reflectivity value, and that's getting into 80 dBz on a reflectivity metric. That is reserved for only the strongest summertime thunderstorms here. And then you'll notice, do you see these spikes coming off the supercell in that radar presentation there? Kind of play that back again. Notice those spikes, you can kind of see them. These are always interesting to see. These are what we call a hail spike, or you might hear them called a TBSS, or a 3-body scatter spike. Whenever we see these associated with a supercell like this, we immediately think big hail. And the reason for that is we call it a hail spike. It's actually, this phenomenon occurs when the radar beams launch their emittance at these storms, right? They're looking for hail, they're looking for precipitation. When the radar beam hits that, it then immediately returns to the radar and tells you the time, the distance from the storm as a result of that, and then the magnitude of the precipitation values. But when you have a large amount of hail in the storm, and you can think of that as this big red oval here, up into the thunderstorm, that radar beam, as it gets launched out from the radar site, hits the hailstone. And because of the shape of these hailstones, not all of the energy is immediately reflected directly back to the radar beam. Some of it is actually redirected downward. It bounces off the ground, bounces off the different objects in the ground, and some of it, a small portion of it, will return back to the hail in the storm. And then some of that, because it's at the same angle, will get reflected right back to the radar. And because it took that extra time to go down to the ground, come back up, and then get reflected all the way back, the radar, the algorithm that tells it how far away, it thinks it's further back behind the storm. So because it took that extra time to get there, it says, well, I saw a little bit of energy come back. This happens at light speed, but let's just say for the sake of the thought experiment, a few seconds later. And it says, well, if it took that much longer to get here, it must be back behind the storm. So it's erroneously thinking there's this almost like a light precip further behind the storm. So if I take you back to this image, you'll see that radar. It thinks that because the energy is actually hitting the ground, coming back up to the hill and going back to the radar, that some of this is precipitation behind the storm. It's not. It is a artifact from how we capture these systems on radar. And unfortunately, what it means for the folks in North Austin, portions of the UT campus, is they're cleaning up a lot of a mess right now. And we also saw some flash flooding out of this as well. You could see another one of these spikes on a supercell behind it. It's just fascinating to kind of compare the meteorology there. We have the last 24 hours of precipitation. Again, this sort of backwards S shape again appears here. So we've had some lingering showers at times across portions of the Midwest. Some of this isn't insignificant. We also saw, we've been focusing on areas in Nebraska and Kansas here, trying to get some more precipitation into here. I think a lot of these folks would take that extra half inch plus at this point. We jump over and look at the all hazards map here this morning. Rather quiet today, perhaps some of this lighting up with some of the severe storms that we'll see later. We'll talk about that in a moment. Heat advisory is active for portions of California as those temperatures are expected to increase tomorrow specifically. We jump over and look at the National Weather Service high temperature forecast here today. Cooler across portions of the midsection of the country, again, under the influence of that trough here, kind of centered over portions of the Ohio Valley. If I take this forecast into tomorrow, see those temperatures rising across the state of California well into the triple digits across the valley here, even getting into the 80s in some of these valleys here like Napa, Sonoma, the Salinas Valley here, prompting those heat advisories across a wide area in the central part of the state. That continues on Saturday, triple digit heat all the way from Bakersfield up to Redding, Sacramento. The municipalities usually get a little bit hotter in the countryside due to the urban heat island effect, and Southern California staying comparatively cooler. But also on Saturday, finally getting some warmth back into the Midwest. We talked earlier about some just not great looking crop stands coming up because some of these areas were a little bit later planted this year, and they came up into some cooler weather. But I'm expecting with this heat here to see some improvements in that regard. And we see more of that Sunday, Monday, and then Tuesday with proper heat now getting into a wide area of the northern Mississippi River Valley, some of this over here into the plains in the mid-Atlantic, areas of Ohio, western Pennsylvania, right, waiting for a break and kind of the cold, wet weather, and finally seeing some heat get in all the way out to Wednesday of next week. We did notice how brief that heat wave was in California. In fact, we went on Saturday from highs well into the hundreds to Monday, cooler than average high temperatures in the mid to low 80s in some areas of the Central Valley. And that just sets the stage for what I'm going to talk about near the end of this video. Is we're seeing this progressive pattern. Things are moving. We're getting warm and then we're getting cool. We're getting cool and then we're getting warm at just a quick rate. And that doesn't concern me as much as the opposite. When we're cold and wet for 3 or 4 weeks, that causes more problems than this kind of rolling roller coaster cycle if we can avoid some severe weather out of it. And kind of comparatively, you also don't want to be very hot and dry for 3 or 4 weeks. You'll take it for a week if you can replace it with some wet, and vice versa. I think what we're seeing here is a developing ridge over the western U.S. We're going to see that develop quickly in the forecast here. Again, that backwards S shape, if we just kind of follow the contours here of the jet stream, showing us that pattern we've been stuck in this week. But if I take this forecast forward from the ECMWF, take it through this evening, and that ridge quickly developing now Friday afternoon over California, Nevada. There's our potential Alvin here. Remember how we kind of talked about these two potentially interacting a little bit. We take this into Saturday, that ridge can parked over Reno, Nevada, maybe up near Boise, Idaho. Sunday moving out of California, the influence And that ridge starting to get past the continental divide out into the central United States, where temperatures are expected to increase, keeping that troughs lingering around the mid-Atlantic and New England, colder temperatures there. And then now Monday, Tuesday, more situated over the Midwest, bringing more heat units, again, into an area that I think needs it at this point. By Tuesday, we're seeing a potential trough here developing over portions of the continental divide into Kansas and Nebraska, expecting a storm system as a result of that to move through the northern plains, an area that has gone through an extended dry stretch here over the last week or so. By Wednesday, still see that trough lingering over Kansas into the Midwest. By Thursday, that starts to exit, but then we have this other piece, take this forecast all the way out, potentially coming through Canada that we'll have to watch. It hasn't been as reliable as a precipitation maker on some of these models. We'll take a look at the differences in a second, but I am expecting some sort of system to come about from this. It's well out into the forecast at this point, almost out to 10 days. So I can't put too much weight and details into it, but we'll look at some of the long range differences in the forecast. Another thing to just kind of watch, if you keep an eye on the Gulf of Alaska here, I'm kind of focused on this area. When I started the video, big trough over this area. In fact, at the end of this video, I'm going to talk about this briefly as it relates to the June conversation. Trough, ridge, trough over here in the Atlantic. But as I play this forecast forward, boy, by Monday, big ridge, trough, ridge. You see how quickly we reversed that pattern? I'm going to take this forecast out near the end of this forecast video and still see some ridging here, but a lot more flow coming through. So we just have, I think, by extension of what we talked about on Tuesday and then Eric yesterday, we just have more momentum and progression in the jet stream right now. And it's keeping the forecast a little bit more varied, which again, I don't think that's a bad thing going into summer. Storm Prediction Center's forecast for today, 2 areas that we're highlighting a slight risk, portions of West Texas and then over in Georgia and South Carolina for some severe thunderstorms again. So hopefully not seeing additional large hail today and hail spikes or TBSSs, but unfortunately I think there's a decent chance of that. Tomorrow, a more material significant severe weather chance over into the Carolinas, so Virginia, both Carolinas, Georgia, maybe even into eastern Alabama. I'll take a look at that in a moment. And I could see on the backside of the jet stream here some thunderstorm development in the Great Lakes region. And then finally, by day 3, this is getting out into Saturday, the exiting of that lingering trough, finally hoping to end some of the severe threats that we've seen across this kind of backwards, this U shape that I've called it at times. If we look at the 3-kilometer NAM forecast going forward through today, I'll make this valid. About 7 a.m. You can see some of those lingering showers. Again, on this plot, they look a little bit stronger than they really are this morning. Some of these not even thundering. And then the lingering showers from the overnight storms in the southern and central plains. So take this forecast past lunchtime, 12 p.m., now 3 p.m., 4 p.m. See these scattered thunderstorm development expected across the southeast, prompting that smaller slight risk area in Georgia and South Carolina. And that activity continues into this evening. Some potential supercells in here we might have to keep an eye on in eastern Georgia and South Carolina. That activity clears out. There's those storms potentially in West Texas that we were talking about. Some precipitation here moving through overnight in portions of the Ohio Valley. And then 4 p.m. tomorrow by Friday, seeing renewed thunderstorm development in western North Carolina, western South Carolina, all the way up into Virginia. Potential wind threat here if it materializes exactly like this 3-kilometer NAM has it. I'm also keeping an eye all the way over here into Georgia and Alabama for what looks like at times near 4 to 7 p.m. some discrete supercellular development can occasionally come along with a bit more tornado risk. So kind of a wide area here, wind, potential tornado threat tomorrow. The Storm Prediction Center has it still at a slight risk. We'll see if they upgrade that tomorrow to enhanced to kind of keep our focus on it a little bit more. And then all the while up here Friday, potentially seeing some thunderstorm development again west of Lake Michigan on the coast here, portions of Milwaukee, potentially Chicago. That we might want to watch. If I just show you the forecasted precip from that same run of the NAM, again, it shows you the areas of focus here across portions of Texas, the southeast, and potential scattered isolated thunderstorm development across the Great Lakes region. I want to jump over and show you the ECMWF forecast. If we remember, right, we were focused on, we had that ridge over the west, lingering trough in the east, but what I really want to see, right, the potential effects of Alvin moving in, that first trough that we see Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, move through that, clears the area Thursday, and then see what might be lingering behind it, what might be coming through the southeast. So that's really what I'm looking for, the ECMWF forecast. Take it into Thursday evening here, we see that scattered thunderstorm development across the southeast. Remember, expecting potentially some showers and storms moving through the Ohio Valley overnight. This is 1 a.m. Friday. You can see those here, not expected to be severe. Those, again, moving through portions of the Tennessee and the Ohio Valley. By 1 p.m. Friday, they're starting to cross the Appalachians, setting up that severe threat tomorrow. In the Carolinas, potentially Georgia into Alabama. This is 7 p.m. Friday evening. Talked about the potential thunderstorm development along the Great Lakes. That trough lingering, unfortunately, over the Mid-Atlantic and New England, continued to see wet conditions here for portions of that area. And then finally, Sunday clearing out. And remember, that time that ridge is moving this way, so it makes sense that we'd see this area clear out as it warms up across the Midwest and the central U.S. And then by Monday, waiting to see what comes off the continental divide here. So we see the forecasted precipitation from Alvin here over Arizona, the precipitation there. And then by Monday evening, increasing across the continental divide, the Four Corners region, portions of West Texas. We have rainfall now moving through the Dakotas, Minnesota, South Dakota, into western Nebraska. And it starts to form an elongated low pressure system here. Sometimes call these a banana low or a pressure trough. It kind of looks like a banana at times. See a wide area of precipitation now Tuesday morning before forming a more coherent low pressure system here over Kansas. So potentially some severe thunderstorm development Tuesday evening. I'll have to keep an eye on, again, wide area of precipitation here. Take this into overnight Wednesday. This low pressure system has now moved up into Wisconsin. 7 a.m. Wednesday. Take this into the evening. We kind of have two areas of focus now, that low pressure system sneaking through. Front along an area here, precipitation in between, and then renewed development, potentially a low pressure system down here over the Red River Valley. That moves through here Thursday, seeing additional precipitation getting up into the Midwest at times, the Eastern Corn Belt by Thursday of next week. And remember, at this time, this one's moving out, and we're expecting that next system here. You can see it precipitating over British Columbia and Alberta. And then by Friday, seeing how much of this is going to get into the northern plains. This is the end of the forecast here, 10 days out, so the details on this aren't clear. But again, would hope to see additional precipitation move through this section here. That would be the likelihood next week, and the details of that just not clear right now. If we look at that all summed up on the 10-day precipitation departure from average from the ECMWF, wetter across a portion of the midsection of the country, but there are some areas here to keep an eye on, right? This area here has missed out on some of the rain this year in total, right? If we add it up from the beginning of January to now, right, we still have some dry soils and some year-to-date precipitation deficits in this corridor. I've called it kind of the Kokomo, Gary, Rockford over toward Iowa City, maybe even at times into western Iowa, also sneaking up into Michigan and Wisconsin at times this year. So this corridor, right, in this forecast from the ECMWF has precipitation chances. They just so happen to miss out on them from this forecast here, and that's still in the realm of possibility. This is just one forecast. But again, the soil moisture deficits continue to linger, and the reason we keep an eye on these is they continue to miss out. That is an easier way to build heat in here later, which exacerbates the same kind of water stress issues that we're already concerned about going into June and July when the sun is at its strongest. If I show you the AIFS over that same time period, I'm going to take it quickly. You'll notice it has poorer resolution, but still kind of focusing on which areas it's showing that better precipitation development. And you'll notice it kind of weakening or showing a less consistent precipitation signal over portions of that same area, Illinois. It's better kind of between in that first system as it comes through Wednesday and Thursday. And then by Saturday, it has better development versus the ECMWF proper here across the northern plains and the Midwest, and brings that precipitation through. The GFS, I believe I have that pulled up here as well, the ECMWF, there's the 4 to 10 day. GFS ensemble I brought up because it shows you kind of just a different opinion here. Better precipitation getting up here further west into the northern plains, and then better precipitation getting here into portions of Illinois, Wisconsin, and Iowa, Missouri. So these systems are going to come through the exact kind of areas that miss out and are not clear yet this far out in the forecast. We'll have to just kind of see where we get to with these. But inevitably, we're going to be talking about those holes in here as they come through. Wanted to jump over and show you this view as I kind of segue into that drought conversation I mentioned at the beginning of this video. And I'm going to do this a little bit quickly here because I want to give you back some time this morning. I'm showing this image here. This is the current sea level pressure anomaly. We're looking at the surface, we're looking where the low pressure system, where the high pressure systems are. I'm showing you this because often going into summer, you'll hear Eric talk about this quite consistently, that we want to look at the strength of the Bermuda High as a vehicle to move moisture up into the central U.S. What I mean by that is, here's the island of Bermuda. We often see in summer a high pressure system somewhere near Bermuda. It just so happens that right now it's almost where it belongs, and it's even a little bit stronger. As a result of that, the winds blow around a high pressure system clockwise, right? So this way. So that allows moisture to come from the Atlantic into the central U.S. Now, right now, It's getting hit by this front because we have another high pressure system centered over Bismarck, and that has its own clockwise flow. And so that's laying a front down in between them, which is why we see so much of that precipitation over the southeast. But we do have that strong Bermuda high, bringing that moisture in, which is why we have severe weather to talk about. Now, as I play this forecast forward, you'll notice that as we get to May 31st, the Bermuda high takes a quick vacation as this trough finally moves out of the area. We see renewed high pressure system in the Pacific. We call this the Pacific high. It's somewhat permanent as well. But you'll notice as I get out into early June, Monday, now Tuesday of next week, notice the Bermuda high returning. It's come back in a big way. It's here, but it's still stronger over this whole area. And we can see that by those pressure anomaly contours. We also have the strong Pacific high here. When we see a strong Bermuda high, we see a strong Pacific high. Well, almost by necessity, between the two, we get low pressure system development over the central part of the country. And that's what we see next week. I took you out to Wednesday of next week. We just talked about that. Pressure trough moving through the country in rainfall. So when we see a strong Bermuda high, a strong Pacific high, we tend to be better confident, or more confident, if you will, in precipitation through the middle part of the country. Which is why when I take this forecast out further, Saturday, June 7th, right, the next system coming through, and I still see that Pacific high, I still see that strong Bermuda high. I feel good about this next system, like the AIFS had, bringing precipitation through the middle part of the country. And that continues through the middle of June, but if I take this forecast all the way out, and this is really getting into June 13th at this point, notice that the Pacific high, it's still there. In fact, it's right here, but it's weaker. And the strongest part of it may have kind of exited the area here. And you notice the Bermuda high, it's still here, but the strongest area is starting to shift east. It's looking at one of those vacations again. And what I see here, right, as I take this forecast through, again, is that same progressive pattern where we're kind of a week on and then potentially a week off. A strong Bermuda high for a week, systems to talk about, moving through the middle part or the northern tier of the country, and then a calmer pattern. I think what we're seeing here, we talked about this on Tuesday, Eric talked about yesterday, is this potential MJO movement. And it might not be the proper MJO, but a Kelvin wave. And the differences, we've talked about before, but in terms of this pattern, I don't think they're too important right now. What we really see, and we talked about this earlier in the video, is this movement in the atmosphere of this trough ridge pattern. We aren't blocked up heading into June. And if we look at that ascent in the atmosphere, we talked about it over the tropics, that MJO or Kelvin wave, and I just take this forecast through early June. You see how quickly that ascent and then that comparative descent is moving. So it moves over here, right? We talked about mid-June, the potential for tropical development here. But even then, it quickly gets replaced by descent. And this is in the later part of June. I'm looking at the ECMWF extended to get an idea of where we're going over the next 30 days. And the only signal I see here in a very strong way is change. Right? It's like, you want me to predict a trough? I can say you're probably going to get both. And that's not a bad forecast in terms of getting heat units on the crop followed by precipitation. I think another kind of interesting way we can visualize this, and I'll end it here to give you some time back, but if I just look at Omaha from that extended ECMWF forecast, so often from these long seasonal forecasts, we look at big, broad things because that's the best way to approach it. You can't get too detailed with the forecast. But just kind of a thought experiment, I pulled up what we call a meteogram. So this is looking at the daily precipitation for Omaha over the next, roughly 40 days. It starts here on May 28th, which is all the way over here on the left side of the graph. And what you see on the top are all the different runs of the ECMWF extended. And what we see here is the control precipitation. So the one run that we focused on, we're seeing how that's precipitating going through the month of June, kind of the very end of May, and then it actually takes us out into July. Now, what we don't want to do here is say that every one of these rainfall events is going to happen. This forecast will not look exactly like this at the end. But what it does show is that ECMWF forecast of this progressive nature of the atmosphere. And what I mean by that is we're calm now, but Omaha, those precipitation chances pick back up again on the 3rd of next week, the 4th, the 5th, the 6th, a little bit plateau, but then that next week, remember Saturday, Sunday, potentially another system coming through. The AIFS had that one stronger through the 8th and the 9th, increasing the precipitation. And then this potential plateau, right? Week on, week off. And then near the end of June, picking that activity up again. Week on, week off, week on, week off. I don't see a reason to think that pattern won't happen. Now, are we going to get exactly, this much rain in June? No, I can't put too much weight into the specifics of this forecast. I also wouldn't tell you that, cancel your plans on the 29th of June because of this forecast. But it does reveal that progressive nature of the pattern right now going through June. And what it means is I'm rather confident that as we get into the middle part of June, after this kind of stronger stretch of precipitation, potentially severe weather to talk about the Midwest, we're likely to return some heat back. The week 3 to 4 temperature outlook from the Climate Prediction Center showcasing this, likely to return some heat back to the central and northern part of the country, and probably going back over a little bit dry as those ridges move through after the troughs of next week. I wouldn't put that chance too low. I'll leave it there today. We'll talk a little bit more about the tropics as we get into this weekend to see where Alvin goes. But if you made it through the end of the video today, thanks for watching, and Eric will talk with you all tomorrow.